3 TV.
Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. And tonight we are turning our attention to polling problems. We saw those long lines at the voting polls last week, but during the presidential preference election. But those problems did not end there, as angry voters wanted answers from their lawmakers, and they demanded their time at the Capitol. And joining us tonight to talk about those election problems and what happens next is Maricopa County Supervisor Steve Gallardo and state lawmaker Jeff Weniger. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Now, lawmakers were hoping to find out a little bit more about what went wrong at that hearing this past week, and they did have a chance to hear from Maricopa County Recorder Helen Purcell and Secretary of State Michelle Reagan. Now, there were dozens of citizens who also showed up, and they wanted their voices to be heard, and they had said stories of waiting in line for hours and sometimes not even having incorrect information, and they wanted to know why it happened and what happens next.
You closed polling places, you denied people the right to, you denied proper ballots, you made sure that many people had to choose between voting or keeping their job. Then a recorder goes out and blames the voters for this. How dare you blame us for this?
I'm curious what would be the requirements to hold not a recount or revote, but extended voting with open registration and same-day primaries.
I just want to start off with what I have to say with the words Purcell resign and Osborne resign.
So we'll start with you, and I just want to ask you real quick. You voted for this. What went wrong?
A perfect storm. The fact is that we have seen over the last several years from the legislature bad public policies coming out of the legislature that helped contribute to the lack of funding to conduct the election, the lack of funding for voter education. Top it off with 60 polling places just didn't work. Perfect disaster here in Arizona.
And a lot of people have questioned, you did vote and signed off. You did raise questions about the changes in the reduction of polling places from 200 down to 60. You did voice concern at that meeting, but you ended up voting for it anyway.
There is blame to go around.
Sure.
From the top, from the governor to the Arizona State Legislature.
Even to the media.
To the County Board of Supervisors. There's blame to go around. But at the end of the day, we need major overhaul of our election system. We need to be able to look at how we conduct elections differently in the past. We need to invest in voter education, invest in our elections. If we truly want to prevent another disaster as we saw, we need to have a strong dialogue, a strong look, and let's start investing in our elections.
Mr. Weniger, I want to bring you in on this conversation. Yeah, you were sitting on that committee at the legislature this past week. Now, tell me a little bit, did you learn anything from this? Because I was there was a lot of screaming, there was a lot of yelling, but not a lot of stories about what went wrong. It seemed like there were more calls for resignations.
Yeah, the election, the way it went forward, was horrible. It was shouldn't have happened in this country where voting is a sacred right. Having said that, I mean, with all due respect to my counterpart, this is the kind of 6 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon to bring everybody into the pie, and I just don't think that's appropriate. I mean, pretty soon we're going to be being blamed for the Kennedy assassination. This is 60 polling places from 200. I mean, it's a massive cut. That was the problem. And
but they were trying to do this election. Helen Purcell said they were trying to save money on this election, and that there were cuts and there were worries about getting money from the state government to fund these elections.
Well, with all due respect to the recorder's office, they were assured by the governor's office that they would be paid. Having said that, 14 other counties in the state had things go off pretty much without a hitch, no major disruption. So I just don't buy into that. Now, with the disruption, real quick, I did learn a few things from the committee. We are looking for further into things with ADOT and with the county and how those registrations are possibly being changed, and some are. But having said that, the one thing I do regret from that hearing is not speaking up and saying, you can disagree with the recorder, and I obviously do, but the way she was treated from a lot of those people was deplorable. I regret not speaking up and saying something.
Just giving you a chance to respond. He's saying that the state legislature really is being blamed for too much here.
Typical legislature. I mean, they fail to want to point the finger at themselves. Let's point the finger at everyone else, but not us. The fact is, I personally have introduced a number of election bills over the last 10 years. Anything from
and for people not familiar, you were at the legislature.
Yes, I've been in both the House and the Senate, and I introduced.
And now you're at the county. Yes.
I introduced a bill to allow independents to vote several times in our presidential primary election. Bill never went anywhere. I introduced a bill that will allow more dollars for education of voters. Bill never gone anywhere. We need the legislature to step up. We need you, sir, as a lawmaker, to step up, introduce legislation that will help prevent this from ever happening again. It's easy to point the finger, but at the end of the day, At the end of the day, you have responsibilities as a lawmaker
on that
to oversee
issue.
that. And by the way, it was not all 60. It was 8 polling places that were a disaster, yes, but we can prevent that from happening again.
On that specific issue, I will, going forward for the next PPE, you either have to let independents vote, or you have to just, because you can't have independents not being able to vote in the future if everybody is funding this, or you have to go forward and let the parties just take care of it themselves.
And it's more than that. It's more than that. It's same-day voter registration we need to have.
Well, then why not go with what I said, which you said you weren't for, and what you had guests on last week saying that your voter suppression, when you purposely keep elections for Phoenix and off years and purposely keep elections for Tempe, which actually the Maricopa County Recorder had to delay telling people that they could go to any voting place because of the Tempe election.
That was an excuse.
Because they're suppressing votes by having it in those other times.
I don't buy the Tempe election. That is only an excuse
Chandler's vote
to
went
not
up.
educate the voters. We need real reform in the state of Arizona. We need to look at how we select our polling places. Tuesday's election, the March 22nd election, is a perfect example why we need federal oversight over our election system.
Now, I want to get
Chandler voter turnout went up 400 to 500% when they moved the election year. If you don't do that, you don't want all those people voting.
Then I ask you to introduce legislation that will help educate voters, introduce legislation that will allow independents to vote, introduce legislation that will have some type of standard or test in selecting polling places, introduce legislation that is going to make people... What's that?
And you'll support moving all those others to the...
I'll stand with you. It will be bipartisan if you introduce
we have a kumbaya moment here,
we will have a kumbaya. The only problem... You won't have your legislative leadership standing with you. That's the problem. We need real reform in the state of Arizona. Stop cutting the funding for education, or not for education, but for election. Stop doing that too, by the way. But stop cutting the funding for how we conduct elections. Let's invest in our election.
We heard
in
it here
terms of
first.
technology.
Tempe, Phoenix, we're moving to the fall, and with everybody else, that's great.
Well, that also opens up the question for consolidated elections, but that is going to be that would be a different topic for a different day. But moving forward now, I mean, what's going to happen? I know there's going to be some field hearings now. It's what happened in these polling sites. I think Maryvale was mentioned, South Phoenix was mentioned, even Gilbert was mentioned. What do you hear?
There are some of those, and I'm going to try to attend some of those. One thing I'm going to be working on with the County Recorder's Office, hopefully with Mr. Gallardo and the Secretary of State's office, is getting to the bottom of this MVD and the county recorders. And this isn't just Maricopa County. There's mistakes everywhere, but there is some evidence of both some things being mistyped in on the MVD side and on the county side.
And do you still have confidence in the county to run elections after this?
I do, and we have another election coming up, and people can make decisions then on
and I have confidence
in
the legislature will do the right thing for the people of Arizona when it comes to our election system. Invest in our election system. Let's come up with reforms on how we conduct the elections. Let's have the Secretary of State's office spend the $4.4 million they have left over in HAVA. Let's use that money to educate voters. Let's not sit on it. This is money that's been in there for over 10 years. Let's spend that money to educate voters.
All right, guys, thanks a lot. But we're going to have to take a break right now. But we still have lots more to come on Politics Unplugged. Coming up next, Arizona voters said no to payday loan stores several years ago, but some lawmakers say we need something to replace them. Just ahead, a battle over lenders some call lifesavers and others call loan sharks. And protesters call on Governor Doug Ducey to stop a series of bills they see as anti-immigrant. But will chains and chants be enough? More on Politics Unplugged.
He vowed to love.
I've never put my hands on you.
You just said that you should be.
And to cherish.
I felt obligated.
He married you out of pity.
All new Dr. Phil. Monday at 3 on 3TV.
Two young entrepreneurs battle for a split decision.
I hope Steve doesn't give you the 10 grand because he's wasting his money.
Leave Steve in a hot seat. Then, before their issues rip them apart, Steve's decoding their fight.
Will you ever trust him?
Monday at 2 on 3TV.
Allergy medicine not working? Try Nasacort for effective relief. It relieves the worst nasal allergy symptoms, even congestion. It's non-addictive, scent and alcohol-free, and has no harsh taste. For 24-hour allergy relief, Nasacort.
Grandpa, would you like to dance?
Okay.
With 100 times more powerful internet, imagine what you can do. Gigablast is here. Bring on tomorrow.
Sullivan Motor Company is your one-stop destination for quality pre-owned vehicles. Over 400 to choose from. And this weekend, get $3,000 minimum for your trade. Any vehicle, any condition, even a clunker. This weekend only at Sullivan Motor Company, 1515 West Broadway in Mesa.
Prop 123 puts $3.5 billion into our classrooms without raising taxes. How does it work? When Arizona became a state, the federal government gave us 11 million acres. We sell some land each year. Proceeds are invested in the state land trust to support K-12 education. Prop 123 simply increases the amount spent on education each year. We have $70 billion of land. Let's use this resource to support Arizona students. Vote yes on Prop 123.
Dental myth 43. Flossing is so overrated. While flossing is a big part of having a healthy smile, regular dental cleaning and exams go even further. Visit bestdentalcareaz.com. Enter your zip code, find a great dentist. It's that simple.
Join Brandon weeknights on 3TV.
And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Tonight's hot topic, loans. In this case, so-called flex loans. And here to explain what they are all about and why they're so controversial at the state capitol are state representatives J.D. Mesnard and Representative Reginald Boulding. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
First of all, let's start off. Explain what exactly are we talking about? What is a flex loan?
Sure. Right now we have in the books where if you have your car and you need to get a high interest rate loan because you have bad credit and can't qualify to bank, you can put your car up as collateral, and it's a high interest rate loan. But if you don't have a car that you own that you can put on the line, then there's really very few options left to you. And when you're in a bind and you have an emergency, you need some kind of money, a couple of $1,000s maybe, there's really nowhere to go. And so this is providing them a tool that they can use.
Well, this sounds like a pretty good idea for someone who's in a tight spot, right?
This absolutely is a horrible idea. One thing that Mr. Mesner failed to mention is that these loans are very high interest, upwards of 200+% interest, that they're located in low-income and middle-income communities. Failed to mention that, again, people are locked into loans for a number of years, and it's totally preying on individuals who don't have the flexibility and disposable income to actually get out of these loans.
Yeah, and it was just a few years ago that the state decided to get out of this business. Why do you want to get back into it?
So we're not talking about the same thing. Payday loans were 400% loans that really hijacked and took as collateral your paycheck, and they could just extract it right from your bank account. We're not talking about that. We are talking about high-risk borrowers. So, of course, the interest rate is going to be high. We are not talking about years. The maximum amount of time in this is 24 months. The maximum amount you can loan is $2,500. But for the most part, it's really more, $1,000 plus or minus. So I think it's a bit of an embellishment to emphasize the highest end. That's really not what we're talking about, and there really isn't an alternative for these folks.
Now, do you see a fundamental difference?
There's no difference. These are predatory lenders who are preying on individuals. What you have is people who live in underserved communities. Their income and their expenses are very much the same. So these individuals don't have disposable income to get out of those loans at a sooner time. So they end up staying in these loans for that 24-month period. So if they borrow $2,500, they're going to end up paying back over $11,000 just to get out of that loan. And this notion that these people have nowhere else to go. There's credit unions. You have places like St. Vincent de Paul. And if the issue is that there's credit worthiness, things of that nature, well, why not set legislation to fix the traditional banking systems, and why not set legislation that actually give people options and not put bad options in front of them?
Yeah, so it sounds good in theory. When Goodwill stepped forward to try to provide lower interest rate loan to this underserved population, that that part of goodwill went under. You can't just force something to happen. You can say, well, there's credit loans available, but they use your credit history. So if your credit is bad, you're right back to what I asked you in the first place, which is where do they go? The only answer I ever get is family and friends. If you have family and friends of means, you should go to them. You may not like the family dynamic that happens as a result, but you really don't have an option for those who have no other alternative. Time and time again, I keep asking this question, and I don't get a response.
So what is the top interest rate that can be charged on these loans?
204% on an annualized basis. It's a month-to-month loan because it's mostly a short-term loan. The problem with emphasizing APR is that the smaller the dollar amount, the less meaningful it is. If I borrowed $10 and said, I'll pay you $20 next week, it's like a 5,000% APR. But $10 is $10. It's a small dollar amount. It's meaningless when you're talking small dollar amounts.
People can't borrow $10 underneath this loan, so that's the issue. This is between $500 and $2,500.
I'm glad you talked about the minimum too, because it's not just $2,500 every time, despite the fact that that's what's emphasized.
And the fact that people can pay this off very quickly is actually not happening at all. The issue is that we are putting bad options in front of individuals. So we are essentially building wealth off the backs of people in poverty, and that's what this industry is doing.
So, real quick, did constituents come to you and say we need this bill back, or was it the industry itself?
Yeah, so both. I didn't have constituents from LD17 that came to me, though I have a number of letters like everyone else has, and we can talk about the veracity of those letters all day long. But I had even heard from stories of my colleagues, even one of our colleagues in the legislature whose sister used something like this to get out of a predicament that she faced because family and friends was not an option after they had exhausted all their resources, and she used it to actually get out of her situation. It can be used for good. Look, is it true that if you give folks an option, they may make bad decisions? That is true, they may, but you don't remove the choices from everybody in the name of protecting some people from themselves.
So that argument is one in which, when you talk about vice crimes, right? You have laws against, prostitution, gambling. You have laws in which, as a society, we say the more you allow these to happen, when you allow communities to be devastated by these crimes, they set a bad precedent for the community. You wouldn't say that those are good. They're individuals who are making their own decisions.
Except the prostitution is universally bad. Universally bad. If you want to say this is universally bad, we're going to disagree.
4% interest is universally bad when you're targeting individuals who are in marginally served communities. We're not, these places aren't popping up in Paradise Valley. These places aren't popping up in
Actually, they are everywhere. And until you give them an option, it's easy to say, well, it's terrible for some people, but until you have an alternative.
Would you take one of these loans at 204% interest?
That would not be my first place to go. It should be nobody's first place to go. If there was no other option, if I had no other place to go and I was facing an emergency, if my car broke down and I don't own my car and I need to get to and from work in my car, it's my means of supporting myself, I will do what's necessary to support my family and I.
The problem is you have 13 other states that don't have flex loans. So what are those people doing? And again, it was mentioned in 2008.
Do you know what they're doing?
In 2008, the voters said they did not want this. And this is a backdoor payday loan because, as you know, in the statute, it allows these lenders to directly connect checking accounts, which most people are paid through their checking accounts, directly to these loans.
But
so it is a backdoor.
The bill prohibits them from requiring connecting to their checking account. That's a big difference. That's a huge difference. It's a default. Well,
that's what you'll have. You'll have people getting this money taken directly out of their checking account. So it's a payday lender. These are loan sharks.
All right, I have to interrupt here a little bit. Just tell us real quick, where is this bill now in the process of people watching us?
So the bill is passed out of the House. It is in the Senate, and it's awaiting a vote. Obviously, it is a controversial bill. There are arguments on both sides. Obviously, I feel that the bill has merit. It's up to the Senate at this point. If they pass it, then it will go to the governor's desk.
Yeah, I mean, this is something in which every member is going to have to dig deep and ask themselves what they put on their literature when they're campaigning this election cycle, that I stood up and I fought for flex loans. I'm sure my colleague probably won't be leading this when he's talking to voters in Chandler. I know that I'll be saying I fought against it. And if people can't stand up for the votes that they're making and they can't go back to their communities and say that we are putting these options in front of them, they shouldn't be voting for it.
Except I stand up for every vote that I make down at the Capitol.
I'm looking forward to that literature on there.
All right, guys. Now we're going to have to take another break, but thanks for stopping by. We have lots more to talk about here on Politics Unplugged.
You're tired of the hate in our states?
Protesters tried chants and chains to stop what they see as an anti-immigrant bill. But can they win over the governor? And they all promised to support the eventual nominee, but it looks like the Republican candidates are backing away from their pledge just days before the big vote in Wisconsin. Promises in politics just ahead.
What do you get for $5 at Papa Murphy's? Dough that's scratch-made each morning, real mozzarella, fresh grated daily, and the satisfaction of a large home-baked pizza. That's what you get with every Papa Murphy's $5 fave. Honestly, the smell alone is worth $5. Home bake a fresh Papa Murphy's faves. Choose a large pepperoni, sausage, or cheese, just $5 every day. Order online at papamurphys.com. Love at 425 degrees.
How strong is Allegra D?
My congestion's out of my way strong.
Allegra D, a fast, non-drowsy antihistamine plus a powerful decongestant that starts relieving your toughest symptoms in just 1 hour.
It's breathing free for 24 hours strong.
Allegra D.
Disney on Ice presents Treasure Trove, presented by Yo Kids Organic Yogurt. Unlock your most precious moments from Disney's animated treasures. Toy Story, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and The Lion King. With all the Disney princesses from Snow White to Rapunzel. Your favorite Disney animated films are now a super cool ice show. Kids tickets start at $10. Visit Ticketmaster for details. Playing April 7th through 10th at Talking Stick Resort Arena.
Thank you so much.
Did you say honey?
Hey, try some?
Mmm, that is tasty.
Thanks.
Is it real?
Of course. Are you?
Nope, animated. You know, I'm always looking for real honey for Honey Nut Cheerios.
Well, you've come to the right place.
Great. Mind if I have another taste?
Not at all. You all right, bud?
Never better.
Oh, I don't know if he likes that. Yeah.
Time for the complete breakfast.
Hi, my name's Bob.
Hi, Bob.
I see this ad on TV. Says I can reduce my debt by 50%. I call, they told me to stop paying my bills, stop talking to my creditors. They'd take care of everything.
I gave them thousands, but most of it went to their fees.
Getting out of debt is neither quick nor easy. There are those who will tell you anything to win your trust.
I'm more in debt now because the fees and interest on my cards kept piling up.
Talk to your creditors directly, or to find a nonprofit agency near you, visit debtadvice.org.
And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. It is now time to talk it out with our partners from First Strategic. And with us today is Steve Roman and Marcus Dellartino. Thanks a lot, guys. And let's start with that ongoing fallout from those polling problems that we saw a little over a week ago. Now, we did see lots of long lines at polling places where dozens of people were showing up, and some were discouraged, some waited in lines for hours and hours. Now, Helen Purcell, the county recorder, had apologized. We saw Michelle Reagan, Secretary of State, apologize. Just your thoughts on what happened, and can it be fixed?
Absolutely, it can be fixed because it's not that complicated of a problem. What the people need to understand is that over 80% of the people that were in that line that were voting were actually ineligible to vote based on the fact that they were either registered independents or weren't registered to vote at all. And so they were the ones who actually caused the line, in fact, by being there. You know, the problem exists that they showed up, they clogged up the system. This is why the lines exist. What is confusing, and to Mr. Gallardo's point about it, is that in regular Arizona general elections, independents and primaries, independents can vote. The presidential preference election is different. And independents can't vote. That is to Mr. Winiger's point that the parties are soon going to have to take this function.
Now, we saw a committee hearing last week. It was on Monday, and it was loud. It was people calling for resignations, lots of yelling. Decorum, it seemed at some points, was just tossed out the window. Now, did leaders there at the Capitol just lose control of that meeting?
I don't know if they lost control, but I think that the situation in itself lost control. But Marcus is absolutely right. The issue is a communications issue. This is about the fact that independents were not allowed to vote, and that was poorly communicated. I think a lot of people tried, but that's where the effort needs to be. If you took those independents out of the equation, those 60 polling places would have fallen exactly into Helen Purcell's numbers that she originally factored in, which was 1,500 per election place. That's how many people actually turned out. In my view, there was a lot more smoke and a lot less fire to this problem, and it can be solved, and it's a communications issue.
Well, there was people waiting for 5 to 6 hours.
They were. You are absolutely right. The question is, those people that were waiting were not eligible. Most of them were not eligible to vote.
Here's the question. Is it the voters' responsibility to check and see if they're actually eligible to vote in the election, or is the government's responsibility, taxpayer funds, to be used to educate those voters to tell them whether they are or not?
I'm not blaming anybody there that was in line. That's why I'm saying it was a communications issue. It was a catastrophe because we did a terrible job of communicating. What I'm saying is that can be fixed, and it can be fixed communicating, or it can be fixed allowing independents to vote, which I'm fully for.
But really quickly, before we leave this point, what the viewers need to know is the people that showed up at this hearing were part of an organized protesters. And now, in today's day and age, which is different from the 60s and 70s, people actually get paid to protest.
Well, I think some of them were from organization groups, but a lot of what we heard there was really hard, was sincere, I think.
I don't think it's been pointed out enough that it's been an organized protest.
This is not a voter suppression thing in any way. 80% of the vote was early ballot. We provide, through our early ballot system, a better way of voting than in almost any other place in the country for all voters. So from that perspective, it is not a voter suppression issue.
All right, now we got to go move on to another controversial topic, and we're going to talk a little bit about the governor who signed perhaps his most controversial bill last week. And we're talking about an immigration bill in question that lengthens the amount of time immigrants convicted of a crime actually have to spend behind bars. Now, the governor was not swayed by dramatic protests at the Capitol. About a dozen protesters showed up at the Executive Tower, including several young women who chained themselves together. Authorities left the protesters alone for more than an hour, then moved in and broke the protest up. But it wasn't easy. It took a while for law enforcement officers to cut through the chains and take the protesters away in handcuffs. Still, protesters there said it was worth it.
4 young women were arrested. Was it worth it?
It was. To them, it was absolutely. And to other community members, they're seen as heroes because there's real fear. It's palpable. And we're calling on the leadership of the governor to really stand up in this moment and do what's right.
Just your reaction to what happened?
You want the governor to stand up and defend convicted criminals. You know, that's the odd optics on this one. If you're running a PR battle on this particular issue, you're going to be on the wrong side of it. What this issue at the end of the day has to do with is criminal justice and what happens to convicted felons after 50% of their sentence is served, or in this particular case, the bill mandates that before you're turned over to ICE that you serve 85%.
All right, now let's move on to national politics and something everybody probably saw coming, the end of the GOP candidates pledging to support the eventual nominee.
I'm not in the habit of supporting someone who attacks my wife and attacks my family.
I've been disturbed by some of the things that I've seen, and I have to think about what my word and endorsement would mean.
Do you continue to pledge whoever the Republican nominee is?
No, I don't anymore.
Boy, that didn't last long, did it?
It didn't last long. I have a new movie. We had Despicable Me 1, 2. We now have Despicable Me 3. We have 3 people who are more than likely going to be, one of them is going to end up being our president, either Clinton, Cruz, or Trump, and they have the highest unfavorables of anybody that we've ever seen.
And very quickly, just your reaction.
You can't attack somebody's wife and then family and expect them to support you. It's just a given.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week for more Politics Unplugged.